influences, values, historical events, the continuity of certain traditions, and the change to certain traditions. Art questions stereotypes and conventions to reflect who we are as a nation. Art is something that can be visualized, touched, and walked through. So it is an aspect of national identity. Now, the question is, to what extent have art and culture created a unique Canadian identity? The 1920s fashion had a minor impact on a distinct Canadian identity because although it pioneered a gender equality revolution in Canada, the clothing style was very. The Group of Seven had a moderate impact on a distinct Canadian identity because although they tried to embrace a new light for Canadian geographical features, they failed to represent Indigenous people. Finally, Indigenous contemporary music has had a major impact on a unique Canadian identity because their activism songs awakened us to our distinct Canadian history. 1920s, fashioning a post-World War I society. With millions of men away from the home as soldiers, women filled manufacturing and agricultural positions on the home front. Many of the women provided support on the front lines as nurses. Women wore trousers, working in factories and steelworks. They were driving tractors and speeding on motorbikes. The fact that women were doing the same jobs as men really promoted gender equality, really accentuating the flapper look, which was very functional and promoted a more boyish figure with flattened chests and flattened hips and a lower waistline. In the 1920s, men's fashion also became very comfortable. They really abandoned their highly formal clothing for more comfy sweaters with loose-fitting sleeves. The 1920s fashion really brought out a Canadian identity of liberation. However, this is a very minor era in terms of a distinct Canadian identity because all the fashion designers giving clothes to Canada were from Paris, like Coco Chanel, and American styles and Canadian styles at the 1920s were pretty much almost exactly the same. Now, moving on to the Group of Seven, who attempted to pioneer a unique Canadian culture identity by embracing Canada's natural landscapes that were frowned upon by foreigners. In fact, books about the Group of Seven have suggested that European travelers of the 19th century always compared the Canadian wilderness to the beauty spots of Europe, the area around Parry Sound to the hills of Clary, the pale islands of Georgian Bay to Hesperus, as well as the Canadian North always had a perception of remoteness, underpopulation, and above all, harsh weather. Foreigners had seen Canada as alien and dangerous. Now it was time to change these prevailing beliefs. Now, A.Y. Jackson, one of the members of the Group of Seven, wanted to practice Canadian nationalism by embracing Canada's harsh winters, so he painted the Smart River in 1945. He used a big variety of vivid blues in a loose, sketchy manner, eliminating detail and applying his paint in thick layers. Jackson was coming to believe that this style was the appropriate one for depicting the Canadian landscape due to the harmonious blending of subtle tones. Although the Group of Seven tried to make a Canadian nationalistic art movement, to what extent, though, is Canadian identity rooted in male English-speaking painters of European descent who paid almost no attention to First Nations people? Finally, Indigenous contemporary music has had a major impact on creating a distinct Canadian identity because they use their traditional music styles with a mixture of technological music production to challenge colonial misconceptions and stereotypes, which awakens us Canadians to our unique history. Take a look at the story of Inuit throat singer Tanya Tagaq. Now, here's an analysis on her music video, Colonizer. So, in conclusion,